Clara Whitmore pressed her fingers against the cold silver tray and breathed. Just breathed. Because if she moved, if she flinched, if she let one tear fall, they would see it. And she had promised herself the night they buried her father in an unmarked grave that no one in that parlor would ever see her break. So she stood still. She let William Carter's laughter wash over her like dirty water. She smiled. She poured the wine. And she waited. If this story already has your heart, subscribe right now and hit that bell. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Virginia summer of 1816. The Carter estate sat on the high ridge above the Shenandoah Valley, like a king surveying his kingdom. Long white columns, deep green fields rolling out in every direction, the smell of tobacco and money hanging thick in the summer heat. Inside the great hall, candles burned in iron chandeliers. Crystal glasses caught the light. The laughter of Virginia's finest families filled every corner of the room. And Clara Whitmore moved through all of it like she was invisible. That was the job. That was the rule she had given herself 6 months ago, the morning she put on a gray dress and stepped into the servants' entrance of this house and became nobody. Keep your eyes down. Keep your mouth shut. Pour the wine. Clear the plates. Don't let anyone look at you too long. She was good at it. She had been practicing disappearing for 3 years. Whitmore. Mrs. Adler, the housekeeper, appeared at her elbow, her voice low and sharp. The East Parlor. Mr. Carter is entertaining. Yes, ma'am. Clara lifted her tray and walked. The East Parlor was the most dangerous room in the house. Clara had learned that quickly. It was where William Carter performed. Where he became the man Virginia believed him to be: educated, formidable, untouchable. He collected an audience the way other men collected land, and he used them the same way. To prove something, to display something. Tonight the room held 12 guests. The Hastings family sat near the fireplace. Judge Harmon Hastings, his wife, and their daughter Eleanor, who wore ivory silk and watched William Carter. The way a hawk watches something it has already decided belongs to it. There were also the Aldrich brothers from Richmond, 2 merchants from Fredericksburg, and a circuit preacher named Booth, who laughed too loudly at everything William said. Clara entered quietly. No one looked up. She moved to the sideboard and began filling glasses. William Carter stood near the center of the room, holding a small leather book. He was 35, built like a man who had grown up working, and then learned to stop broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, with a jaw that seemed carved from the same hard Virginia stone as the ridge his house sat on. He was handsome. Clara had noticed that the first day, and then deliberately set the observation aside, the way you set aside something that does not belong to you. The Romans had a phrase for it. He was saying, his voice carrying that particular ease of a man who has never had to raise it to be heard. Noblesse oblige. It is not simply a matter of birth. It is an understanding. A man of standing carries responsibility for those beneath him. Hear, hear, said Judge Hastings, raising his glass. Of course, William continued. That assumes those beneath him are capable of understanding responsibility at all. Light laughter moved through the room. Clara kept her eyes on the wine. I believe certain qualities, William said, his tone shifting toward something almost academic, almost amused, are simply not present in the lower classes. Not through any fault of their own, mind you. It is simply nature. A plow horse and a thoroughbred are both horses, but you do not ask the plow horse to race. More laughter. Eleanor Hastings smiled at William over the rim of her glass. How very true, she said. Her eyes moved briefly to Clara, a flicker, nothing more, and then returned to William. Clara moved to the far side of the room and began refilling a glass near the window. You there? She stilled. Girl. She turned. William Carter was looking at her. Not with cruelty exactly. More the way a man looks at a chair he is about to move, present physical something to be arranged. His expression was almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. Your name is Clara, isn't it? From the Whitmore farm down the valley. Yes, sir. Whitmore. He said it like he was tasting it, testing it. Pig farmers. Yes, your father raised pigs. A few of the guests glanced her way. Not with interest. With the faint reflexive attention people give to something mildly unusual, a dog in the room, a bird at the window. Yes, sir, Clara said. My father kept livestock. William nodded. He turned back to his guests, a half smile on his face. He switched languages without warning, slipping into Latin as easily as another man might slip on a coat. Suis similis dominus, he said. A man's master resembles his swine. The Aldrich brothers laughed outright. Judge Hastings pressed his lips together in something between reproach and amusement. Eleanor Hastings raised her hand to cover a smile. The preacher Booth let out a bark of laughter. Well put, Mr. Carter. Clara did not move. Her fingers tightened around the tray. She knew exactly what he had said. She had been reading Latin since she was 7 years old, sitting across the table from her father, who had corrected her pronunciation with patient, unhurried precision. She knew what he had said. And some locked room deep inside her, some door she had kept sealed for 3 years cracked open. Don't. That was the voice she had built. The survival voice. Don't do this. You need this job. You need this house. You need... But her father's voice was louder. A lie tolerated is a truth surrendered. Clara, never surrender your truth. She set the tray down on the sideboard. She turned around. The room did not notice at first. She was, after all, nobody. A girl with a gray dress and a tray. Then she spoke. Qui alterum incusat probri, eum intueri ne oblitum sit sui. The laughter stopped. William Carter turned slowly. Clara kept her voice level, her hands still at her sides. She did not perform it. She simply said it the way her father had taught her to say anything true clearly and without apology. It is from Plautus, she said. It means, he who accuses another of shame would do well to look to himself first. I believe, sir, you would know it if you had read your Plautus as carefully as you quote him. The room had gone completely silent. William Carter looked at her. She looked back. And in that moment, in the space between one breath and the next, something shifted in his face. The pleasant performance slipped. Underneath it was something Clara had not expected to find there: genuine surprise. Not offense. Not anger. Surprise. You read Latin, he said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a man recalculating something. I do, sir, Clara said. She picked up her tray. Will there be anything else? Cha-cha. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow cot in the servants' quarters and stared at the wooden ceiling and waited for the sound of her own ruin. Waited for Mrs. Adler's footsteps, for the hard knock on the door, for the words, "Collect your things." She had gone too far. She knew it. She had promised herself 3 years of promises, and then in 30 seconds she had undone all of it. Because a man laughed at her in Latin. Your father would have done the same thing. The thought came quietly. Your father did the same thing. And look what it cost him. She pressed her face against the thin pillow and let herself feel that for a moment the full weight of it. Her father's study, the smell of old paper and candle wax. The morning the men came to the door. Then she folded it back up and put it away. She would not be dismissed. She would be careful in the morning. She would be invisible again. She had to be. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. William Carter did not sleep either. He stood at the window of his study long after the guests had gone, a glass of whiskey turning warm in his hand, and thought about a pig farmer's daughter who quoted Plautus. He had been wrong about what happened in that room. He had expected the girl to flush, to stammer, to look at her shoes. He had made that small Latin joke 100 times, different rooms, different servants, different versions of the same point. They never answered. They never could. But this one had. And she had not done it wildly, not with anger or tears, or the defensive scramble of someone caught out. She had done it the way his old professor at William and Mary had done it, with complete calm. With the kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly what you're saying and why it is correct. Qui alterum incusat probri. He turned it over in his mind. Plautus. Yes. She was right. He had not read that passage carefully. He knew it, but he could not have cited it that way, with that precision without a text in front of him. How does a girl from a pig farm cite Plautus from memory? He set down his glass. The answer was simple. She doesn't. Not unless she had been educated. Not unless someone somewhere had sat down and taught her Latin literature with the seriousness that his own tutors had brought to his lessons. Which meant she was not what she appeared to be. He went to his desk. He found the file Mrs. Adler had given him when the new servants were hired in January, brief notes on each one. He flipped to Clara Whitmore's page. Whitmore Clara, age 24. Farm family, Rockingham County. Letter of reference from one Reverend Thomas Aldous Staunton. Reliable quiet, no known difficulties. He stared at it. No known difficulties. He turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. He read the letter of reference again. It was short. Reverend Aldous had called her capable, honest, and well-suited to domestic service. Standard language. Nothing unusual, except for one sentence near the bottom, written in a slightly different hand as if added later. She knows more than she is allowed to reveal. William read it twice. Then he poured another glass of whiskey and sat down to think. The morning came hard and bright, the way Virginia summer mornings do. Heat already building by 7. The fields already golden, cicadas already singing in the oaks. Clara was in the kitchen by 5:30. She helped with the bread. She polished 3 sets of silver. She carried water. She did everything Mrs. Adler asked of her without a word of complaint, and she kept her eyes down, and she was invisible. By 9 o'clock she thought she might survive the night she'd had. By 9:15 she knew she was wrong. Clara. Mrs. Adler appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was careful, unreadable. Mr. Carter wishes to see you, his study, now. The kitchen went quiet. The other girls looked at the floor. Clara set down her cloth. Yes, ma'am. The study smelled like leather and old paper and faintly like whiskey. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, books arranged with the precision of a man who believed in order and category in the hierarchy of things. A globe sat near the window. Maps were pinned to a board behind the desk. William Carter was standing when she came in. Not seated behind his desk, the way a man sits when he wants to remind someone of distance and authority. Standing, near the window, his hands behind his back. That detail registered. Close the door, he said. She closed it. He looked at her for a moment. The morning light was honest. It showed the circles under his eyes, the fact that he had not shaved yet, the slight dishevelment of a man who had been awake thinking. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand, sir. Something moved across his face. She could not read it precisely. He nodded once. All right. He moved to his desk, but did not sit behind it. He leaned against the edge of it instead, a slight adjustment, a small gesture that reduced the formality of the position by a degree. She noticed it. She was not sure if he intended for her to notice it. Last night, he said. Yes, sir. I owe you an apology, sir, for speaking out of... I didn't ask you in here for an apology. She stopped. He reached behind him on the desk and picked up a small leather volume. He held it out toward her. Plautus, he said. Truculentus. Tell me which passage. Clara looked at the book, then at him. Sir, you cited him last night. I want to know the passage. His voice was even uninflected. If there was a trap here, she could not see its shape. Point it out. She crossed the room. She took the book. She opened it. She knew this text she did not need to search, and she found the section within 30 seconds. She turned it to face him. He looked at the page. He read. Then he looked up at her. You were right, he said. I misremembered the context. She said nothing. Sit down, Miss Whitmore. This time she sat. He took the chair across from her, not the chair behind his desk, but the reading chair, the one set at an angle near the bookshelves. The arrangement made them almost level, almost equal. Clara felt the strangeness of it move through her like cold water. "How long have you read Latin?" he asked. She considered lying. She considered the calculus of it, what he already knew, what he was trying to confirm, what the cost of each answer might be. "Since I was 7, she said. "Who taught you?" A pause. "My father." "Your father," William said, "kept pigs." "He did, sir." "And he also taught you classical Latin?" "Yes." "And Plautus? And I would guess other texts." "Some, sir." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with that same expression from last night, not the easy social performance, but the thing underneath it, focused, calculating, but not unkind. "You know what I did last night was wrong," he said. Clara kept her face still. "You made a joke, sir." "I made a joke in a language I assumed you could not understand about your family in a room full of people." His voice was level. "That is not merely a joke. That is something else." "Yes, sir." "And you answered me." "Yes, sir." "Correctly." "Yes, sir." A sound moved through him, not quite a laugh, something drier. "You are very certain of yourself, Miss Whitmore." "My father taught me to be sir." He said certainty about truth is not arrogance. It is simply accuracy. William looked at her. "Your father sounds like an educated man," he said. The room went still. She felt the sentence land, felt the weight of it, the precision of it, the way it landed exactly on the thing she could not afford to have uncovered. "He was a farmer, sir," she said. "Farmers can be educated." "Yes, sir." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Whitmore, I am not asking you these questions to dismiss you or to punish you for last night. I want to be honest about that. I am asking because there is something in your history that does not add up, and I am a man who is troubled by things that do not add up. So I will ask you plainly, is there something about yourself that you have not disclosed in your employment here?" Clara looked at him. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. She thought about her father, about the house they had lived in, the real house, the one with the study and the globe and the bookshelves. About the morning the men came, about the papers signed and the doors locked and the name erased. "No, sir," she said. "I am exactly what my letter of reference says I am." William held her gaze. "All right," he said after a moment. He stood. The interview apparently was over. "You may go," he said. "Mrs. Adler will have your morning duties." She stood. She smoothed her skirt. She moved toward the door. "Miss Whitmore?" She turned. He was still standing near the chair, one hand resting on its back. He looked, she thought, slightly tired and slightly uncertain. Both were expressions she had not expected to see on his face. "Regarding last night," he said, "I was wrong to say what I said, in any language." He paused. "I am not accustomed to admitting that, but it is true." Clara held very still. "Don't let it mean anything," she told herself. "It is just words. Men like this apologize when it costs them nothing." But she looked at his face, and she could not find the performance there. She could not find the easy social surface he'd worn in the parlor. "Thank you, sir," she said. She turned. She opened the door. She walked back down the hall with her spine very straight and her hands very steady, and she did not let herself think about the way he had looked at her until she was back in the kitchen with the noise and the heat and the ordinary world surrounding her again. Then she allowed herself one small private thought. "He is more complicated than I thought." And that was the most dangerous thing she had discovered yet. The summer moved forward, the heat thickened, the tobacco ripened in the fields. Clara worked. She was precise about it. She had always been precise. Her father's daughter in this, as in everything. She arrived early. She finished tasks completely. She gave Mrs. Adler no cause for concern and no reason to look at her too closely. But something had changed in the house, and she felt it the way you feel, weather changing, a shift in pressure, a change in the quality of light. William Carter had started to notice her. Not in the way she feared, not in the way that some employers noticed young women in their households, the way that had required two of the other girls to change their routes between rooms and their timing around certain doors. This was different. He noticed her the way a man notices a problem he cannot solve. She would pass him in the hall and feel his gaze pause on her for half a second longer than necessary. She would be carrying books from one room to another. Part of her duties was maintaining the library, and she would look up to find him watching her from the doorway, not with anything she could name clearly, just with that focused, calculating attention. Once she dropped a sheaf of papers. She was carrying a draft contract Mr. Carter had been reviewing, and when she gathered them from the floor, she automatically sorted them back into their correct order before placing them on the desk. She looked up to find him watching her. "I noticed you reorganized them," he said. "They were out of sequence, sir. I recognized the sections." "You read legal contracts, Miss Whitmore." She should have said, "I just recognized the page numbers, sir." She should have smiled helplessly and looked confused. "My father," she said carefully, "sometimes discussed his work at the supper table." "What work?" She paused one beat too long. "Farming, sir," she said. "Contracts for livestock." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, but she could see the slight furrow between his brows. The piece that did not fit. She was being careless. The days in this house, the strange question of whether she could trust his apology, the warmth that kept creeping into his voice when they spoke, it was all making her careless. She could not afford careless. The problem was Eleanor Hastings. Eleanor came to the Carter estate twice a week, ostensibly for social calls, to take tea with William's widowed sister Margaret, who lived in the east wing of the house and suffered from poor health. In practice, Eleanor came to be seen by William to occupy space near him, to make the eventual nature of their relationship feel inevitable. Virginia had already decided they would marry. Clara had understood this within her first week. It was in the way Mrs. Adler referred to Miss Hastings' preferences when arranging rooms, in the way the cook asked what Miss Hastings particularly enjoyed for the Tuesday tea. Eleanor Hastings was 29, daughter of the circuit judge, and she moved through the Carter house with the confidence of someone who already considered it partly hers. She had looked at Clara twice, both times with the particular kind of attention wealthy women gave to servants they found mildly irritating. A swift, comprehensive assessment, a small dismissal. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late July, something changed. Clara was carrying a stack of books through the main hall when Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs. She was coming down, and her eyes found Clara, and she stopped. "You," she said. "Bring those books here." Clara climbed the stairs and held the stack toward her. Eleanor picked up the top volume. It was a copy of Virgil's Aeneid, one of William's, being returned to the library after his sister had borrowed it. "Aeneid," Eleanor said, turning it in her hands. She glanced at Clara. "Do you know what this is?" "It's a poem, miss. Roman." Eleanor smiled. "Yes, Roman. Do you read Roman poetry, girl?" "No, miss," Clara said. Eleanor set the book back on the stack. Her eyes moved slowly across Clara's face. "Interesting," she said softly. "Nothing more." She descended the rest of the stairs and walked toward the morning room. But that evening, Clara overheard her in the parlor with Margaret Carter, William's sister. "There is something odd about your housemaid," Eleanor said. Her voice carried clearly through the half-open door. "The Whitmore girl. I looked at her today, and she looked back at me with—" She paused. "It was very strange. She looked at me as if she were my equal. Perhaps she's simply confident," Margaret said mildly. Margaret Carter. Clara had decided was probably the kindest person in this house, sharp-tongued in her wit, but genuinely warm underneath it. She laughed too easily to be dangerous. "Servants are not confident," Eleanor said. "They are either properly humble or they are a problem. This one is a problem. Oh, Eleanor. I'm serious, Margaret. I've seen her type before. Girls who mistake an education they were not entitled to for a station they have not earned. Clara stood very still in the hallway. An education they were not entitled to. She pressed the words down the way she pressed everything down. She walked quietly away from the door. 2 days later, William found her in the library. She had a habit, she knew it was a habit she had been trying to break it, of taking down books while she was dusting, reading a page or two, putting them back. It was a private thing, quick and quiet. She was always careful. She was not careful enough. She was standing on the low step stool, a copy of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, open in her hands when she heard the door open. She had time to close the book. She did not quite have time to put it back on the shelf before he was in the room. Miss Whitmore. She turned. He was looking at the book in her hands. I was dusting, sir. I took it down to Blackstone, he said. He walked forward until he was close enough to read the spine. Volume 2, Property Law. He looked at her. Were you dusting it from the inside? She said nothing. He took the book from her hands gently and looked at the page she had been reading. It was a dense section on property rights, on the entailment of land, on the specific legal circumstances under which a man's estate could be seized by another party. He looked up. Miss Whitmore, he said, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I would appreciate a direct answer. She waited. What happened to your father? The silence that followed was the longest Clara had ever held. He died, she said finally. 3 years ago. How? Another pause. Illness. William looked at her with that focused, patient attention. The look that she was beginning to understand meant he was not going to let something go. You are reading the section of Blackstone that covers the legal seizure of property, he said quietly. Your letter of reference contains a sentence that says you know more than you are allowed to reveal. You speak Latin. You read legal texts. You know things that a farmer's daughter raised on a pig farm in Rockingham County does not know. He stopped. Something happened to your family, Clara. Something that took away things that were yours. And you came here. And you hid. She stared at him. It was the first time he had used her given name. She did not know what to do with it, with his voice saying it with the absence of miss and girl and the careful social grammar of their positions. Don't trust this. The old voice, the survival voice. He is curious, that's all. Curiosity is not safety. Curiosity runs out. Sir, she said, keeping her voice level, I think you have a great imagination. I think I have accurate observations, he said, which is different, sir. She looked at him steadily. I do my work. I give you no cause for complaint. I ask only to be allowed to continue doing so. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. All right, he said. But his voice was different. Not colder. Something else. Something that might have been frustration or regret, or the very specific feeling of a man who sees a door that will not open to him. He put the Blackstone volume back on the shelf himself. You may finish the dusting, he said. He moved toward the door. Mr. Carter. He turned. She had not planned to say anything else. But the sentence was already in her mouth, and it was true, and her father had taught her that truth should be spoken. Your kindness, she said, began only after you discovered I was educated. He went still. That is not kindness, she said. That is curiosity. The words landed. She watched them land. He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds. Then he walked out and closed the door behind him, and she stood in the library alone with the smell of old books and the sound of her own breathing, and the knowledge that she had just done again the thing she could never afford to do. Told him the truth. She did not sleep that night either. She lay in the narrow cot and listened to the summer dark and tried to calculate her position. He would dismiss her. He had to. She had insulted him twice now, once publicly, once privately, and whatever strange mixture of guilt and curiosity had kept him from acting before she had surely exhausted it. She thought about where she would go. Staunton. Maybe the Reverend would take her in again for a few weeks, give her time to find another position, another house, another name. She thought about the Blackstone volume and the passage she had been reading. The conditions under which a seized estate may be reclaimed by a surviving heir. She pressed her face against the pillow. She was not ready. She was still not ready. She did not have enough. The documents she needed were still. The knock on her door was soft. She sat up. "Miss Whitmore?" It was not Mrs. Adler. It was a younger voice, Sally, one of the kitchen girls. "I'm sorry to wake you. Mr. Carter sent a note. He says—" A pause, as if she were reading. "He says he'd like to speak with you in the morning, in the library again. He says—" Another pause. "He says to tell you that you were right, and that he would like to understand what you meant." Clara sat in the dark. "He says you were right." She pressed her hands flat against her knees and breathed. Outside, the summer night was loud with insects and warm wind, and the distant sound of something moving in the dark fields. The tobacco ripening, the earth doing its slow, patient work. She thought about her father. Never surrender your truth, he had said. She had not. She had been surrendering everything else, her name, her history, her face in society, but not that, not the truth. She lay back down. In the morning, she would go to the library. She would look at William Carter across the distance of everything that lay between them, his name and her name, his house and her history, his world and the world her father had built and lost, and she would decide what she was willing to risk. But first, she had to let herself feel what she was feeling, the terrifying, forbidden, absolutely impossible thing that was beginning to stir somewhere beneath all the careful architecture of her survival: hope. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she slept. The morning came the way it always did in summer, fast and hot and unforgiving. Clara was dressed before the bell rang. She had not needed the bell. She had been sitting on the edge of her cot since before dawn, hands folded in her lap, running through every possible version of the conversation that was waiting for her in that library. She had told herself in the dark hours before the sky lightened that she would be careful, that whatever William Carter wanted from her this morning, she would give him nothing she could not afford to lose. She would be pleasant. She would be vague. She would be the quiet, capable, unremarkable girl the Reverend's letter had promised. She believed herself right up until the moment she pushed open the library door. He was already there. He had been there a while, she could tell from the way the candles on the table had burned down from the stack of papers beside him that had clearly been sorted and resorted from the fact that he looked up at her with the eyes of a man who had been awake and thinking for hours. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her the way she had seen him look at a difficult passage in a text fully without pretense, trying to find the meaning beneath the words. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He leaned forward and placed both hands flat on the table. "I've been thinking about what you said." "Sir, I should not have—" "You were right," he said. It came out clean and direct, the way she imagined it had cost him something to rehearse it that way. "I want you to know I understand that. My interest in you changed after that night in the parlor. Before it, you were invisible to me. After it, you were a puzzle. And I called that curiosity kindness, and you saw through it, and you were right to say so." Clara looked at her hands. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I am tired of talking around the truth in this house," he said, "and because I think you understand that better than most people I know." The sentence landed somewhere it should not have. She felt it and kept her face still. "What do you want, Mr. Carter?" "I want to know who your father was," he said. "Not what he farmed, who he was." She looked up. He was watching her with that direct, patient attention. No performance, no ease, just the real version of him, the one she had glimpsed twice now, the one that made him more dangerous than the polished version because it was harder to refuse. "He was a good man," she said finally. "I believe that. What else?" She held the silence for 3 full seconds. Then something in her not weakness, she told herself, not weakness, call it strategy, shifted. He was a teacher, she said. He taught law. William went very still. What was his name? Thomas Whitmore. She held his gaze. He taught at a small college in the valley. He had 23 students. He knew every one of their names. She paused. He also knew the names of the men who destroyed him. But he never taught those. William said nothing for a long moment. What happened to him? He said quietly. He was accused of fraud, she said. The words sat in her mouth like stone. By a man whose son he had failed on an examination. By a family with enough money to make the accusations stick. She stopped. The college removed him. The courts agreed with the accusation. He lost his position, his home, his library. She paused. He was dead inside 8 months. I believe it was grief mostly. He had nothing left to hold him here. William was quiet. And his estate, he said. He said it carefully as if he already suspected the answer. Taken, she said, to satisfy the judgment against him. And you? I had nothing left either, she said, except his name and his education. She met his eyes, which I was told repeatedly that I was not entitled to. The last sentence came out sharper than she intended. She saw it land on him. She did not apologize. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and she watched the expressions move across his face, something that might have been anger, something that might have been shame, something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. The family, he said slowly. The family that brought the accusation. He said a name, a question in his voice. Clara went cold. She looked at him. He read the answer in her face. She watched him read it, watched the specific weight of it settle into him, watched the color change slightly in his jaw, because the name he had said was a name she knew. A name that had been spoken in this house. A name that walked up these stairs twice a week and took tea in the east parlor and looked at Clara Whitmore as if she were furniture. Hastings, he said again, softer. Not a question this time. I did not say that, Clara said. No, he said. You didn't. The silence between them was different now. It had weight and shape. It had the specific density of something that cannot be unsaid, even when it has not been spoken. William stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, and she watched the tension in his shoulders, and thought, this is where it ends. This is where the curiosity becomes inconvenience. This is where he decides it is not worth it. You should have told me, he said. You were the last person I could have told, she said. He turned. Why? Because Judge Hastings is your guest. His daughter is. She stopped herself. You have a relationship with that family. Of course I could not tell you. Of course I could not tell anyone. That is precisely the nature of what was done to my father, Mr. Carter. It was done by people with enough connections that there was no safe direction to speak. He looked at her. So you came here, he said. You hid in my house, in a pig farmer's name. Yes. And the Blackstone volume. Yes. You are looking for something. Documentation. A way to reopen the case. She did not answer, but she did not look away. He crossed the room. He stopped 3 feet from her. Close enough that she could read his face clearly, every line of it, the exhaustion and the anger and the thing underneath that she still could not fully name. Are you afraid of me? He asked. The question surprised her. She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she said. Something moved through his face, not offense, something that looked almost like respect. All right, he said. That is an honest answer. He went back to the table. He sat down across from her again. He picked up a piece of paper and a pen, and he held the pen and he looked at her. Tell me what you need, he said. She stared at him. Sir, to reopen the case, to reclaim your father's estate, or his name, or whatever it is you came here for. Tell me what you need. She stopped, looked at him. Why would you help me? Because I was wrong about you, he said simply, and I am trying to figure out what that means." He set the pen down. "And because if what you're telling me is true, if a man with a family and a position and 23 students was destroyed because a powerful family's son failed his examination, then something in this county is wrong, and I have been living in the middle of it without knowing." He stopped. "I do not like that, Miss Whitmore. I find I like it very much less than I expected." Clara looked at him for a long time. She thought about everything she had built, every careful wall, every managed expression, every practiced silence. She thought about how long she had been alone in this. "I need the original court records," she said. "The accusation and the judgment. I believe there are inconsistencies that were not examined properly. I can get those. I need letters. My father wrote to the college board 3 times before he died. I believe those letters were never read. I do not know where they are. I can look. And I need—" She stopped. "The last thing. The hardest thing. I need to know whether the testimony given against my father was consistent. There were 2 witnesses besides the family. I have reason to believe they were pressured." William said nothing for a moment. Then, "That is a serious accusation." "Yes," she said. "It is. You have evidence." "I have my father's journal," she said quietly. "He kept notes. He wrote down everything. He wrote down the names of the men who spoke to him before the trial, what they said, what they implied." She paused. "He gave it to me the week before the judgment was handed down. He said, 'Keep this safe, Clara. Keep it until there is someone who can use it.'" The room was very quiet. "You've been waiting for 3 years," William said. "Yes. For someone who could use it." "Yes." He looked at her. She looked back. And in that silence was the entire question, the one neither of them was ready to say out loud. "Is that someone me?" He did not answer it. Neither did she. "Go do your duties," he said finally. "I have things to look into." She stood. She moved to the door. "Miss Whitmore." She turned. "Last night," he said, "you slept. I heard you had been having difficulty." He said it carefully, watching her face. "I'm glad." She felt the sentence in places she had no defenses for. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, and walked out. She made it all the way to the linen cupboard at the end of the hall before she stopped walking. She pressed her back against the cool wall. She pressed her hands to her face. She gave herself 30 seconds. Then she straightened up, put her hands at her sides, and went to work. The house did not stop running because the ground had shifted under it. The linen still needed folding. The silver still needed polishing. The bread had to be laid for breakfast, and the rooms had to be ready before the family came down, and Clara Whitmore had been invisible for 3 years, and she could be invisible for 30 more minutes. But something had changed in the quality of her invisibility. It was harder to maintain. That was the problem. It is one thing to disappear when no one is looking for you. It is something else entirely when someone is. She knew without being told that William Carter had looked for her 3 times before noon. She knew because Sally mentioned it not unkindly, just noting it the way servants note the patterns of the house. "Mr. Carter asked where you were twice this morning, and once after lunch, just so you know." Sally had looked at her with the careful sideways attention of a girl trying to figure out what was happening without asking directly. Clara said, "Thank you," and returned to folding tablecloths. But she felt the knowledge of it like a small persistent warmth she could not quite extinguish. He was looking. Not in the way she feared, not in the way that required planning escape routes and changed schedules. In the way of a man who has started a project and cannot stop thinking about it. She was the project. She recognized it. She told herself to stay clear-headed about what that meant, that she was an interesting problem to him, an injustice that offended his sense of order, a puzzle with pieces that did not fit the picture he'd believed he was living inside. She told herself all of this very firmly. She almost believed it, the thing she had not anticipated. The thing she had no language for because she had spent 3 years systematically removing herself from situations where it could grow. was this: William Carter was different in private than he was in public, and the private version was harder to distrust. The public version was easy. Polished, confident, performing his position with the casual ease of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. She had categorized that version correctly within the first week. She knew exactly how to be invisible around that version. But the man in the library, the one who set down his pen and said, "Tell me what you need," that man was something else. That man had the specific quality of someone who had been told he was right about everything for so long that the experience of being wrong had become genuinely interesting to him, rather than threatening. That was rare. She had not expected to find it here. She finished the tablecloths and moved to the kitchen garden to help with the afternoon meal. And she thought about her father, and about the journal wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her travel bag, and about how long she had been carrying it alone. She had not let herself want help. She had trained that wanting out of herself the way you train pain out of a healing injury, through repetition, through insistence, through the daily practice of not reaching for what was not there. And now something was there. And she did not know what to do with it. 2 days passed. She did not see William alone in those 2 days. She saw him at meals she served in hallways she passed through, at the edges of rooms she entered. Each time he looked at her with that specific focused attention, and each time she looked back steadily. And each time they both moved on without speaking, as if they had made an agreement she didn't quite remember signing. On the 3rd day, Eleanor Hastings came for her Tuesday visit. Clara had been dreading it since the morning in the library. She had run through the calculations again and again, what Eleanor might see, what she might sense, whether the change in the quality of William's attention would be visible to a woman who had been watching him closely for years. The answer, she discovered by 2 o'clock, was yes. Eleanor arrived at noon. By 1, she had moved through tea with Margaret and was in the front parlor with William and Clara, carrying a letter tray through the hall, caught 2 minutes of the conversation through the half-open door. "You seem distracted," Eleanor said. Her voice was pleasant, precise. "I have business on my mind," William said. "You always have business on your mind. This is different." A pause. "You looked at the Whitmore girl when she passed the doorway just now. She was carrying correspondence. I expected her to bring it in." "She passed the door twice," Eleanor said. "You looked both times." A silence. "Eleanor," William said. His voice had a warning edge to it, but it was soft. The edge of a man who doesn't want a confrontation, not of one who's willing to have it. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Eleanor said smoothly. "I'm simply observing. You've been different since the night of the dinner party. Since she answered you in Latin." Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped a degree in temperature. "William, she is a servant. Whatever she said that night, whatever little performance she gave, she is still a servant. And whatever she is pretending to be, she is pretending. You believe everyone beneath you is pretending, Eleanor." The sentence came out flat. Clara in the hallway felt it land. There was a long silence in the parlor. "That is uncharacteristically unkind," Eleanor said finally. "Yes," William said. "It was." But he did not take it back. Clara moved away down the hall, her heart beating against her ribs, the letter tray cold in her hands. He had not taken it back. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself that a man defending himself against an accusation was not the same as a man defending the person he was accused of. She told herself 100 sensible things in a row, like building a wall brick by brick. But she had heard his voice, and it had not wavered. That evening, when the house had quieted and Eleanor had gone home and William was alone in his study, he sent Mrs. Adler to find Clara with a message. "Come to the study at 7. Bring the journal." Clara stood in the kitchen with the message in her hand, and Mrs. Adler watching her with carefully arranged blankness. "The journal, miss," Mrs. Adler said neutrally. "He said you would know what he meant." She did. She went. She brought the journal. He was at his desk when she came in. Really at his desk this time, properly positioned with papers spread in front of him and a look on his face that said he had been working. He looked up when she entered. "Lock the door," he said. She locked it. He gestured to the chair across from him, and she sat and placed the journal on the table between them. It was small, maybe 50 pages, cloth-bound, her father's handwriting covering the inside, in small, careful script. William looked at it, but did not reach for it. "I found the court record," he said, "from your father's trial." Clara's hands stilled. "I have a contact in Staunton," he said. "He pulled the documents this afternoon." He pushed a sheaf of papers toward her. "Look at the second witness statement, the signature." She pulled the papers to her, found the page, found the signature. She looked up. "This is wrong." "Yes. The name on this statement, Alderman Thomas Grove, he died in 1813, a full year before the trial." "Yes," William said. "Someone signed his name." "Yes." She stared at the page. The signature was careful, deliberate, not a hasty forgery, but a considered one. Someone who had expected it never to be looked at closely. "William," she said. She realized it immediately, the mistake, the drop of formality, the "sir" she had forgotten. She opened her mouth to correct it. He shook his head slightly. "It's all right." She looked back at the paper. "They fabricated testimony," she said, "against my father. They fabricated a witness who was already dead. It appears so. This is—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers flat on the table. "This can reopen the case. This is enough to reopen it. It is enough to begin," he said carefully. "It is not yet enough to win. We would need a judge willing to hear it, and we would need more than one piece of evidence. The Hastings family has a long reach in this county." He paused. "In this state." She looked at him. "You said we." He looked back at her steadily. "I did." "Why?" "Because it is the right thing," he said. "And because—" he stopped. Started again. "Because I live in this county. I have always believed it was a just place. I have always believed the systems in it functioned as they were supposed to." He pushed back from his desk slightly. "If your father was destroyed by a fabricated testimony and a powerful family's influence, then nothing I have believed about this county is true, and I cannot unknow that. I tried these last few days. I cannot do it." She looked at him across the small table, and the journal, and the forged signature of a dead man, and she felt something she had not felt in 3 years, the specific, terrifying, irreversible sensation of trusting someone. Not fully. Not yet. But the door was open. She picked up the journal and held it for a moment. Then she placed it in his hands. "My father's notes," she said. "He named the men who pressured the witnesses. He named the meeting they held. He named the amount of money that changed hands." She held his eyes. "He documented everything. He always documented everything. He said the truth was the only thing they couldn't take if you wrote it down carefully enough." William held the journal. He opened it to the first page. At the top in her father's hand were 3 words. "For Clara. Always." He looked up at her. Something in his face shifted, a small, quiet fracture there, and then gone. "He was a good man," he said. "Yes," she said. "He was." They sat in silence for a moment. And in that silence was something fragile and new, not yet named, not yet safe, but real. The way a fire is real, even before the wood has fully caught. Then William set the journal carefully on the desk and reached for a clean sheet of paper. "All right," he said. "Let's start at the beginning. Tell me everything." And for the first time in 3 years, Clara Whitmore began to speak. She spoke for 2 hours. She did not cry. She had promised herself long ago that she would not cry telling the story. Not because the grief wasn't there, but because tears would make it a tragedy, and her father had not wanted it to be a tragedy. He had wanted it to be a case, a winnable case. A wrong that could be corrected if someone read the evidence carefully enough. She told it like a case. She gave names and dates and amounts. She described the morning the men came to the house, the sound of the locks, the weight of the box she had carried out the back door when no one was watching. She described Reverend Aldous taking her in the months of silence, the careful construction of the pig farmer's daughter. William listened. He asked questions, sharp, precise ones. He took notes. He treated her like a witness who had information worth having, like someone whose knowledge mattered, like an equal. She did not say so out loud. But it was the first time in 3 years that someone had treated her that way, and she felt it with a clarity that frightened her. When she finished, he set down his pen. He was quiet for a moment. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. She waited. "Judge Hastings," he said carefully, "is a man I have known my whole life. He was a friend to my father. He married into the family I expected for a long time that I would also one day join." He stopped. "I want to be honest with you about what it will cost me to pursue this. I want you to understand I know what I am saying when I say I want to help." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you told me," he said simply, "that my kindness began only after I discovered you were educated, that it was curiosity, not kindness." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that what I am saying now is not curiosity. It is a choice, and I am making it with open eyes." The silence that followed was the longest and the most complete they had ever shared. "All right," she said finally. Her voice was quieter than she intended. "I believe you." She stood. She moved to the door. She had her hand on the latch when he spoke again. "Clara." She turned. He was standing now behind his desk, holding her father's journal. He looked at her in the lamplight with an expression she had no word for, something between determination and something softer, something that had no business being there and was there anyway. "Your father was right," he said. "The truth, if you write it down carefully enough, cannot be taken." She looked at him. She pressed her lips together just for a moment. Then she nodded once and walked out of the study and went to her room and sat on the edge of her cot. She pressed her hands together. She looked at the dark window. And she allowed herself for exactly 30 seconds to feel something she had not felt in so long. She had almost forgotten its shape, the precise, dangerous, breathtaking sensation of not being alone. Then she folded it up, put it away, lay down on her cot. Outside, the summer was at its loudest. Every tree alive with sound, the whole dark countryside breathing and turning and pressing on. She had been alone in this for 3 years. She might not be alone anymore. That was the thought she fell asleep with. It was also the thought that frightened her most. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of early mornings and late nights of documents spread across William's study table of her father's journal, read and reread until the pages were soft at the corners. 3 weeks of Clara moving through the house in her gray dress, invisible to everyone except the one person she could not afford to be visible to, and yet somehow impossibly, that visibility had become the only thing keeping her steady. They had a system. She would leave notes folded inside a specific book on the library shelf. 3rd row, second from the left, a copy of Cicero's letters that no one else in the house touched. He would leave responses. Sometimes he left documents. Once he left a single sheet of paper with 3 names written on it and the words, "These men testified." "I know where 2 of them are." She had held that paper for a long time before she put it away. The work was real. That was what she had not let herself believe until now, that it could be real, that the thing she had been carrying alone for 3 years could actually become a case that someone would hear. William Carter was not a lawyer, but he moved in a world where lawyers listened, where judges owed favors, where a man's name opened doors that a dead professor's daughter could not even find. She knew what she was doing was dangerous. She knew that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. She knew Eleanor Hastings watched William the way a hawk watches weather, reading every shift for what it meant. She knew that servants talked, that houses breathed gossip, the way they breathed air, that 3 weeks of evening sessions in a locked study would eventually become visible to someone. She knew all of this, and she kept going anyway. Because her father had named the men, and the names were there in the journal, and the truth carefully written down could not be taken. She was in the kitchen at 6:30 on a Thursday morning when Sally came in from the yard with her face arranged in the specific way of someone who has seen something they are not sure how to report. "Miss Clara," Sally said. "Miss Hastings is here." Clara looked up. It's Thursday. She comes on Tuesdays. I know, Sally said. She's in the front parlor. She asked for you specifically. The kitchen went quiet. Clara felt every head turn slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to register. She set down the cloth she was holding. She smoothed her apron. She walked to the front parlor. Eleanor Hastings was standing near the window. She was not sitting. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Eleanor always sat. It was a performance of ease of someone so comfortable in this house that she could arrange herself in it like furniture. Standing meant she had come here purposefully, had chosen to stand, so she would be at full height when Clara walked in. "Close the door," Eleanor said. Clara closed it. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. She was dressed beautifully as always, deep blue silk, her dark hair perfectly arranged. She had the kind of looks that came from generations of good nutrition and careful marriages, the specific attractiveness of a woman who had never had to worry about anything coarsening her. "I want to talk to you," Eleanor said, woman to woman. Clara waited. "I have been watching you," Eleanor said, "since the night of the dinner party. I have been watching William watch you, and I have been asking myself what it is about a pig farmer's daughter that has captured the attention of a man like him." She paused. "And then I asked a different question. I asked whether you are actually what you say you are." Clara kept her face still. "I am what my letter of reference says, miss." "Your letter of reference," Eleanor said, "was written by a reverend in Staunton, who I have recently learned has an interesting history with a disgraced scholar named Thomas Whitmore." She let the name land. She watched it land. "I wonder if you know that name." The room was very quiet. "Thomas Whitmore," Clara said evenly, "was a professor at a small college in the valley. He died 3 years ago." "He did," Eleanor said. "He died in disgrace, convicted of fraud. His estate was seized." She took a step forward. "He also had a daughter, a girl who disappeared after his death." Another step. "A girl who I am told was educated well beyond her station, who spoke Latin, who read law." She stopped. "I wonder where that girl went." Clara looked at her. She felt the calculation running, what Eleanor knew, what she guessed, what she could prove, what she intended to do with it. "I don't know anything about that family, miss," she said. Eleanor smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Yes, you do." She said it without heat, almost gently, the way you speak to someone you have already defeated. "You are her. I am certain of it. I have been certain since the afternoon I showed you the Aeneid on the stairs, and you identified it without my finishing the title." She tilted her head. "A pig farmer's daughter doesn't know the Aeneid, Miss Whitmore, but a professor's daughter does." Clara said nothing. "Here is what I want you to understand," Eleanor continued. "I do not intend to destroy you. I want to be very clear about that. I have no quarrel with you personally. You are a girl in a difficult position, and you have been resourceful about it, and I can even admire that." Her voice stayed level, pleasant, terrifying in its pleasantness. "What I cannot allow is for William Carter to continue whatever it is he is doing. He is distracted. He is pursuing something he believes is a righteous cause, and he does not yet understand what it will cost him." She paused. "I am asking you for your own sake and for his to leave this house. Take a position elsewhere. Disappear again. You are good at that." Clara held very still. "And if I don't," she said, "then I will speak to my father," Eleanor said simply. "And my father will speak to people. And what happened to Thomas Whitmore will look like a misunderstanding compared to what happens next." She said it without raising her voice, without anger, with the perfect calm of someone who has never had to threaten anyone twice. She moved to the door. Her hand was on the latch when Clara spoke. "Miss Hastings." Eleanor turned. Clara looked at her. She kept her voice as level as Eleanor's had been, as pleasant, as precise. "Your father signed a judgment against my father on the testimony of a man who had been dead for a year," she said. "I have the court records. I have the dates. I have the signature." She paused. "I also have my father's journal. He wrote down the names of the men who were asked to testify. He wrote down what they were promised. He wrote down who made the promises. She held Eleanor's gaze. I want to be clear, I am not threatening you. I am simply making sure we understand each other correctly. Eleanor's face had gone still. Not pale, she was too controlled for that. But still. You have been busy, she said. I have had 3 years, Clara said. A long silence. You are more dangerous than I thought, Eleanor said. No, Clara said. I am exactly as dangerous as my father taught me to be. You simply weren't paying attention. Eleanor left without another word. Clara stood in the empty parlor and let herself feel the shake in her hands. Let it be there acknowledged. It gave it 30 seconds. Then she pressed her palms flat against her skirt and walked back to the kitchen. She found William in the hall. He took one look at her face. What happened? She knows, Clara said quietly. Eleanor knows who I am. His jaw tightened. How much? Enough. She connected me to my father. She knows about the Reverend. She paused. She asked me to leave. He looked at her. What did you say? I told her about the fabricated testimony. Something moved across his face, surprise quickly replaced by something harder. Clara, if she goes to her father. I know. The judge will move fast. He will move to discredit everything before we can get it in front of anyone who... I know, she said again. He stopped. He looked at her. Are you frightened? He asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she had when he'd asked whether she was afraid of him. She gave him the same respect of a real answer. Yes, she said. But I've been frightened for 3 years. I know how to work frightened. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. We need to move faster, he said. I have a lawyer in Richmond. I've been writing to him. He has agreed to look at the documents, but I told him we needed another week. He shook his head. We don't have another week. No, she said. We have until Eleanor decides to act. Then I need to go to Richmond myself. Today. He said it with the decisiveness of a man committing to something. I can be there by nightfall if I leave within the hour. I'll take the documents and the journal. Not the journal, she said immediately. He looked at her. The journal is the only original evidence we have of my father's account, she said. If something happens to you on the road, nothing is going to happen to me on the road. If something happens, she said firmly, the journal needs to be here. With me. She paused. Take copies. I made copies last week. They're in the Cicero. He stared at her. You made copies. 3 sets, she said. I hid them in different places. He stared at her for another moment. Then a sound moved through him, short, almost a laugh, something between disbelief and admiration. 3 years ago, he said, when you came to this house, you already had a plan. I had the beginning of one, she said. I needed... She stopped. You needed someone with access, he said. She looked at him. Yes. The word sat between them with everything it carried, the 3 months of careful invisibility, the night in the parlor, the plotus, the study, the journal, every conversation in between, all of it folded into that single syllable. And now you have one, he said quietly. Yes, she said. I do. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted too long for the hallway they were standing in, too long for the distance between them, too long for everything that was sensible. Then he said, I'll leave within the hour, and walked to his study to prepare. He was gone by noon. The house felt different without him in it. Clara noticed it and refused to examine the feeling too closely. She worked. She kept her eyes moving, her attention distributed across everything, the other servants, the sounds of the house, the windows, the road. She was watching for Eleanor. Eleanor did not come. By evening, Clara was beginning to think she had more time than she feared. By the time she went to her room, she had almost talked herself into steadiness. The knock came at 9 o'clock. Not on her door, on the servants' entrance at the back of the house. Mrs. Adler answered it. Clara heard the voices from the kitchen, heard the change in Mrs. Adler's tone, the careful, controlled flatness of a woman who has just encountered something she did not expect. She went to the kitchen. Two men stood in the servants' entrance. She did not recognize them, but she recognized their type, the specific quiet authority of men employed by someone powerful to do things that powerful person does not want to do themselves. "We're looking for a woman named Clara Whitmore," the first man said. He said it to Mrs. Adler, but his eyes had already found Clara. Mrs. Adler said, "I'll need to see your authorization." "Judge Hastings's authorization," the man said. He produced a paper. Mrs. Adler took it, read it. Her face did not change. Clara looked at the paper from where she stood. She could not read it at this distance, but she could read the seal at the bottom, the judge's official seal, the one stamped on documents that carried legal weight. He moved fast, she thought. Eleanor went to him immediately. "On what grounds?" Mrs. Adler said. "Fraud and misrepresentation," the man said. "She entered this household under false pretenses. Judge Hastings has issued a writ for her questioning." Mrs. Adler turned. Her eyes found Clara across the kitchen. Clara did not move. "Mrs. Adler," she said. Her voice was steady. "May I see the document?" The man shifted forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with—" "She asked to see the document," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Margaret Carter stood in the kitchen doorway. William's sister was 41, small and pale, and generally understood by the household to be gentle and unwell and not particularly consequential. She stood in the doorway in her dressing robe, and she held herself with an absolute stillness that Clara had never seen from her before. "She has the right to read a document addressed to her," Margaret said. Her voice was quiet, precise. The voice of a woman who has spent 40 years being underestimated and is choosing in this moment to spend no more time on it. "Give it to her." The man looked at Margaret. He looked at Mrs. Adler. He looked at Clara. He handed Clara the document. She read it. It was exactly what she had feared, a writ for questioning on the grounds of fraud, misrepresentation, and concealment of identity. Her name was on it. Her real name, Clara Whitmore, daughter of Thomas Whitmore. The judge had signed it himself. She looked up. "This names me under my real identity," she said, "which is the identity I have concealed, which means the judge already knows who I am, which means someone told him." She looked at the men. "Who told him?" The men said nothing. "He issued this today," she said. "This afternoon. My employer, Mr. Carter, is not present in this house. This document was issued on a day when the man who could contest it is not here." She looked at the seal. "That is a convenient coincidence." "Ma'am," the first man said, "I'm not here to discuss the timing. I'm here to bring you for questioning." "Tonight," Margaret said. "You are here at 9 o'clock at night to take a woman for questioning." The judge, Margaret said, "is Eleanor Hastings's father, and my brother is William Carter, who has business in Richmond, and will be back tomorrow, and I suggest very strongly that you return in the morning when he is present." She held the first man's gaze without blinking. "Unless you would like me to write him tonight and tell him that Judge Hastings sent men to remove a member of his household staff while he was absent." I wonder how he would feel about that. The silence in the kitchen was complete. The first man looked at the second man. "Morning," Margaret said. "Come back in the morning." They left. Mrs. Adler closed the door behind them. She stood with her hand on the latch for a moment, and then she turned and looked at Clara with an expression that held many things at once, not all of them readable. "Whatever this is," Mrs. Adler said carefully, "it is going to become very complicated." "Yes," Clara said. "I know." "Mr. Carter." "He needs to know tonight," Clara said. She looked at Margaret. "Is there a writer who could go to Richmond?" "My brother's man, Thomas," Margaret said. She was still standing in the doorway, still perfectly still, and now Clara looked at her. Really looked at her, and saw something she had missed in 3 months of passing her in hallways. Margaret Carter was angry, not loudly, not demonstrably. But underneath the pale quiet was a fury so old and so controlled it had become structural, something she had been built around for so long it had become part of her frame. "Sit down, Clara," Margaret said. It was the first time she had used her given name. Clara sat. Margaret came into the kitchen and sat across from her. Mrs. Adler, reading the room with the skill of a woman who had managed this household for 20 years, quietly removed herself. "My brother told me about you," Margaret said. "Not everything. He is careful with everything, but enough." She looked at Clara directly. "He told me your father was Thomas Whitmore. He told me what was done to him." Clara said nothing. "I knew your father," Margaret said. The words hit Clara like cold water. "You—" She stopped. "You knew him." "Not well. I was younger, but he taught briefly at a lecture series my father attended. I was allowed to sit at the back." Margaret's voice was steady, but something in it had changed, softened at the edges, the way old grief softens things. "I was 17. I remember thinking he was the most genuinely excited person about ideas I had ever seen. He spoke about the law as if it were alive, as if it were a living thing that could be improved." She paused. "I thought about him when I heard what happened. I thought about it for a long time." Clara pressed her hands flat on the table. "He was," she said very quietly. "He was exactly that." They sat for a moment in the shared weight of it. "Thomas," Margaret called. The rider came. Clara dictated the message. Margaret listened to every word and did not interrupt once. "Come home tonight if you can. They know. The judge has signed a writ. We have until morning. Bring whatever you have." Thomas rode within 20 minutes of the men leaving. Clara spent the night at the kitchen table. Margaret brought tea and sat with her for 2 hours, and they talked not about strategy, not about documents, but about Thomas Whitmore. About the way he lectured, about the specific quality of his enthusiasm, about what it felt like to sit in a room where someone was teaching you that ideas mattered. It was the strangest 2 hours of Clara's 3 years in hiding. When Margaret finally went to bed, she stopped in the doorway. "He was wrong about you, you know," she said. Clara looked up. "William," Margaret said. "The night of the dinner party. He was wrong in every possible way a man can be wrong." She paused. "He knows that now. But I wanted to say it plainly. What he did was wrong. The joke in Latin, the dismissal, the assumption." She held Clara's gaze. "A woman should not have to answer cruelty with brilliance in order to be treated as a person. You should have been treated as a person from the moment you walked into that room." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Margaret nodded and went to bed. Clara sat alone with her tea and the sound of the house settling around her in the summer dark. She thought about her father, about what he would say if he could see her now, sitting in the kitchen of a Virginia estate at 10 o'clock at night, waiting for the son of a Virginia landowner to ride back from Richmond with documents that might restore everything that had been taken. He would have had something to say about the irony of it. He had always had something to say. He had been before everything, a man who could not resist the beauty of a well-constructed sentence, a well-placed observation, a truth spoken at exactly the right moment. She was more like him than she had ever been able to tell anyone. The clock on the kitchen wall said 11 when she heard hooves on the road. She was at the door before they reached the yard. William dismounted with the specific speed of a man who had been riding hard and knew he didn't have time to feel it. He was dusty from the road, his coat thrown over his saddle, his hair undone from the wind. He saw her in the doorway. "How bad?" he said. The judge issued a writ. His men came at 9. Margaret sent them away until morning. He walked past her into the house and she followed, and he went straight to the kitchen table and pulled papers from the satchel over his shoulder. "My lawyer in Richmond," he said. "He read everything tonight. He says the fabricated testimony alone is grounds for review. He says if we can get it in front of a circuit judge, not Hastings, someone from outside this county, we have a case." He spread the papers. "He wrote a letter, an official letter. We can use it tomorrow when they come back." Clara looked at the letter. She read it through once. Her hands were steady. "This is enough," she said. "It is enough to demand a formal review," he said. "It is enough to stop them from arresting you on Hastings's authority. It is not yet enough to win." He looked at her. "But it is a beginning. Will your lawyer come here?" "He'll be on the road by dawn," William said. "He'll be here by afternoon." She nodded. She looked at the papers. "They know everything now," she said. "Eleanor told her father today. Once he moves, once he begins to talk. I know. Your position in this county, Clara." His voice was flat. "Stop." She looked at him. "I know what it will cost," he said. "I told you that. I am not asking you to manage my decisions for me." He held her gaze. "Are we doing this or not?" She looked at him across the kitchen table, with the documents between them and her father's case in the balance, and everything she had been building for 3 years, sitting in this moment, waiting. She thought about the morning the men had come to her father's house, the sound of the locks, the weight of the journal in her hands as she went out the back. She thought about Thomas Whitmore at 17, sitting in a lecture hall, watching a man teach about the law as if it were alive. "We're doing this," she said. He nodded once. "Then get some sleep," he said. "They'll be back at first light, and I want you rested." She stood, moved to the door, stopped. "William?" He looked up. "Thank you for writing back tonight," she said. "You didn't have to." He looked at her with that expression, the one she still didn't have a name for, the one that had no business being there, and was there anyway. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She went upstairs. She lay down on her cot. She pressed her hands together and looked at the ceiling and felt the full weight of tomorrow pressing on her chest like something alive. Outside, the summer night was loud and warm and endless. In the morning, everything would begin. She knew with the particular clarity of someone who has carried a thing alone for a very long time that the next hours would determine everything. That the careful architecture she had built over 3 years was about to be tested in a room full of people who had every reason to dismantle it. She knew this, and she was ready. What she did not know, what she could not have prepared for, was what would happen first. What would happen at dawn before the lawyer arrived, before William had finished his coffee, before any of the careful plans had a chance to unfold. What she did not know was that Judge Harmon Hastings himself would come to the Carter estate with 6 men and a second document, and that the second document would not be a writ for questioning. It would be a warrant for arrest, and it would have a different name on it. It would have William Carter's name. She heard them before she saw them. 6 horses on the morning road made a particular sound, not the casual rhythm of travelers, but the deliberate weighted beat of men riding with purpose. Clara was already awake. She had not truly slept. She had lain on her cot, moving in and out of something that resembled rest, but contained too much thinking to qualify as sleep. And when the sound reached her through the thin wall of the servants' quarters, she was on her feet before the first horse reached the yard. She went to the window, counted them. 6 riders, and at the front, unmistakable in his bearing, even at this hour, Judge Harmon Hastings. She did not waste time. She pulled her dress on, tied her hair back with hands that were steady, because she made them steady, and was out of her room and down the back stairs before anyone else in the house had registered the sound. She went straight to William's study. She knocked twice fast. "Come in." He was already dressed. He had the papers from Richmond spread on his desk, and a cup of coffee going cold beside them, and when she came through the door with her face set the way it was, he stood up immediately. "How many?" he said. 6, she said. "The judge is with them." Something moved through his jaw. He came himself. "Yes." "That means he's not sending a message," William said. "He's making one." He picked up the lawyer's letter from the desk, folded it, put it in his coat pocket. "Wake Margaret. Tell her to stay in her room. William." She stopped him with his name, and he stopped because of it, turning back. "There is something else. Last night when I read the writ..." She paused. The judge moved faster than he should have been able to. "Eleanor spoke to him yesterday afternoon. He had a document drafted, sealed, and delivered by 9 in the evening. She held his gaze. That is not a man responding to a complaint. That is a man who had this prepared, who was waiting for a reason to use it. William went very still. He knew, she said. He has known for some time. Not everything, but he knew I was here. He was watching. Then someone in this house told him, William said quietly. They looked at each other. Neither of them said the name. But it was there between them the question of who in this household had been watching Clara long enough to carry information to the judge, and whether that person had done so willingly or because they had been asked. It doesn't matter right now, Clara said. What matters is the door. He nodded. He picked up the satchel with the copies, her father's notes, the court records, the Richmond lawyer's letter, and he squared his shoulders, and he walked out of his study, and she followed him to the front of the house. The knock, when it came, was not a knock. It was the sound of authority, heavy, unhurried, the knock of a man who has never had a door refused to him. William opened it himself. Judge Harmon Hastings was 62 years old, and he had the appearance of a man who had spent those years being right about everything and had been shaped by it, the way water shapes stone, smooth on the surface, hard all the way through. He was not large, but he occupied space the way powerful men do, as if the air around him had been informed in advance of his importance. He looked at William, then past William at Clara, who stood 4 feet back and did not drop her eyes. William, the judge said. Pleasant, familiar, the voice of a man visiting a neighbor. I apologize for the hour. Harmon, William said. Not judge, not sir. The deliberate flatness of a man establishing that he will not perform deference this morning. You have 6 men with you. That seems excessive for an apology. The judge smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I have a warrant. I heard you had a writ last night, William said. I understand my sister sent your men away. Your sister, the judge said, exceeded her authority. The writ stands. He looked past William again. Miss Whitmore, I believe you know why I'm here. Clara stepped forward until she was beside William, shoulder to shoulder with him. She did not do it consciously. Her body simply moved to the position, and once it was there, she understood it and stayed. I know what you believe you are here for, she said. I also know that the testimony used to convict my father included a signed statement from a man who had been dead for a full year before the trial. The judge's face did not change. That was the tell. A man who had not known what she was going to say would have reacted confusion or denial or the instinctive performance of innocence. The judge's face simply held its shape, as if he had expected this, as if he had prepared for it, and was now moving through a version of events he had already rehearsed. That is a serious accusation, he said. It is a documented fact, she said. I have the court records, I have the dates, I have the signature of Alderman Thomas Grove, who was buried in Staunton in April of 1813 on a document dated November of 1814. She paused. I also have a lawyer in Richmond who read those documents last night and has written a letter requesting a formal circuit review. Now something moved in the judge's face. Small, controlled. But there. He looked at William. You went to Richmond. I did, William said. On her behalf. On behalf of the truth, William said. Which I had previously understood to be something you valued. The silence between the two men was the specific silence of something old and established, beginning to crack a friendship, an assumption, the particular weight of 30 years of social proximity. William, the judge said, and his voice had changed. The pleasantness was still there, but underneath it now was something harder and less patient. You do not understand what you are involving yourself in. I think I understand it very well, William said. This girl, her name is Clara Whitmore, William said. Her father was Thomas Whitmore, who taught law in this valley for 11 years and was convicted on fabricated testimony by a court you presided over. That is her name, and that is her history, and I would ask you to use it correctly. The judge looked at him for a long moment. You are going to lose everything, the judge said quietly. Your standing in this county, your connections, The business relationships your father built over 40 years. He paused, and something in his expression shifted towards something almost like regret, almost like the genuine article. Eleanor will not wait indefinitely, William. There are other men. I know that, William said. And you do not care. I care about a great many things, William said. The question is, which ones matter more? The judge turned to Clara. He looked at her with the specific attention of a man reevaluating a problem. You are your father's daughter, he said. It was not a compliment, and it was not an insult. It was a statement of fact delivered by a man who was recognizing something he had hoped not to have to recognize. Yes, she said. I am. He was a stubborn man, the judge said. He would not be redirected. No, she said. He believed that truth was worth the cost of speaking it. She held his gaze. He was right. The judge looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he looked at the men behind him. Then he looked at William. I have a warrant, he said again. Quieter now, as if saying it carefully might make it more precise. Show it to me, William said. The judge produced it. William took it, read it. His face did not change while he read, but Clara, standing beside him, felt the moment his body shifted a barely perceptible change in his posture, something tightening. He handed it to her. She read the name on the warrant. William Carter. Obstruction of lawful process. Concealment of a fugitive. Misuse of a court proceeding. She looked up. This is for me, she said. It has your name on it, the judge said. It is designed to stop me, she said. You cannot arrest me without a circuit court hearing on the fraudulent testimony, so you arrest him. She looked at the judge steadily. You are arresting the man who helped me because you cannot touch me directly. I am executing a lawful warrant, the judge said. You are protecting yourself, she said. The word landed in the yard like a stone in still water. She watched the ripple move across the judge's face, not guilt. He was too old and too practiced for guilt to show on him. But something. Recognition, perhaps. The specific discomfort of a man who is being seen clearly and cannot prevent it. William took the warrant back from Clara's hands. He held it for a moment. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket next to the Richmond lawyer's letter. All right, he said. William, Clara started. It is all right, he said. He turned to her and he looked at her with that expression, the real one, the one under everything, and his voice was steady. The lawyer arrives this afternoon. You have the copies. You have the journal. You know what to do. I am not letting them take you because of me, she said. They are not taking me because of you, he said. They are taking me because I did the right thing and it inconvenienced them. He held her gaze. Those are different things. I need you to know that. She stared at him. Clara, he said quietly. Your father documented everything. He wrote it down. He gave it to you and told you to find someone who could use it. His voice was steady, certain. Use it. She pressed her lips together. He turned back to the judge. I will come with you, he said. I will not require the 6 men, but I understand their presence was intended to make a point, and the point has been received. He looked at the judge, without any remaining performance, without the social ease that had characterized every exchange they'd had in 30 years of proximity. I want you to think carefully, Harmon, about what you are doing. Not for my sake, for yours. The judge said nothing. A man who was convicted on a dead man's signature is going to have his case reviewed, William said. That process has already started. What you do in the next hours will be part of the record. He paused. I hope you make wise choices. He picked up his coat. He looked at Clara one more time. Afternoon, he said. The lawyer. Don't wait for me. He walked out into the morning. She watched him go. She stood in the doorway and watched William Carter walk to his horse with 6 of the judge's men behind him, watched him mount, without being told to watch him ride out of his own yard with the straight-backed ease of a man who has decided something and is at peace with it. She stood there until the sound of the horses faded. Then she turned around. Margaret was standing behind her. Clara looked at William's sister. the small pale woman who had stood in a kitchen doorway the previous night and dismissed two of the judge's men with the quiet authority of someone who had decided to stop pretending to be inconsequential. "I heard," Margaret said. "He is gone," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She was going to keep it steady. "They have him." "I know. The lawyer comes this afternoon." "I know that too." Margaret looked at her. "What do you need?" Clara took a breath. "I need a room with a table," she said. "I need every copy of every document. I need ink and paper. And I need someone who knows which men in this county owe your brother a favor, because I intend to call every one of them before nightfall." Margaret looked at her for a moment. Something in her face, the old anger, the controlled fury, the thing Margaret Carter had been built around for so long, it was structural, found its way to the surface. "Come with me," she said. They worked. Clara had always worked well under pressure. Her father had taught her that too, the specific discipline of a mind that does not scatter when the stakes rise, that becomes more precise when precision matters most. She spread the documents on the dining room table. She organized them the way her father had organized his cases chronologically, first, then by type of evidence, then by the names they implicated. Margaret sat across from her and wrote letters. Her handwriting was beautiful, precise, the handwriting of a woman who had spent years with little to do but improve her accomplishments. She wrote to 3 men she named without being asked, men whose relationships with William she knew and could articulate. One was a former business partner in Charlottesville. One was a family friend who sat on the state legislature. One was a retired judge who had Margaret mentioned quietly held a long-standing professional disagreement with Harmon Hastings. "He will be very interested in fabricated testimony," Margaret said of the last man. "He has always said Hastings cuts corners. He has never been able to prove it." "He can help prove it now," Clara said. Margaret sealed the letters, sent them with Thomas the writer, who left before 9 in the morning. By 10 o'clock, Clara had a problem. The journal was safe. The copies were organized. The Richmond lawyer was on his way. The letters had been sent. Everything that could be done before the lawyer arrived had been done. And she had nothing to do but wait. Waiting was the one thing she had never learned to do well. She sat at the table with her hands flat on the papers and thought about William Carter riding away that morning with his back straight and his coat folded over his arm, and she felt something she had been specifically, deliberately, and completely refusing to feel for the past several weeks. She loved him. The thought arrived with the particular force of something that has been true for a long time and simply been waiting for the moment its container cracked. She looked at the wall. She loved him. Not because he had helped her. She was clear-eyed enough about herself to know that gratitude and love were different animals, and she had never confused them. Not because he was handsome, or because he owned land, or because his name was the kind of name that opened doors in Virginia. She loved him because of the way he had set down his pen and said, "Tell me what you need." Because of the way he had said "we" before she had decided to trust him. Because of the morning in the library, when he had handed her the Plautus and said "you were right," and she had understood that for this man, those 3 words were not casual. They cost him something, and he paid the cost anyway. She loved him because he had ridden back from Richmond in the dark. She pressed her hands flat on the table. This was not useful right now. She filed it away with the efficiency she applied to everything, acknowledged, categorized, set aside for later. Later she could afford to feel it properly. Right now she had a case to build and a man to get out of the judge's custody by nightfall. The lawyer arrived at 2 in the afternoon. His name was Robert Finch. He was 53, compact, with the specific energy of a man who has spent 30 years in courtrooms and enjoys them. He came through the front door with a briefcase and read the documents on the dining room table in 45 minutes without speaking. Then he sat back and looked at Clara. "You built this," he said. It was not a question. "My father built it," she said. "I carried it." "The signature on this Grove testimony is fatal to their case," Finch said. "Any circuit judge in Virginia will have to acknowledge it. The question is getting it in front of a circuit judge before Hastings manages to have the documents challenged on procedural grounds. He tapped the table. He will claim the originals are tampered. He will claim the copies are fabrications. He will attack the chain of custody. I anticipated that, Clara said. She pushed a separate folder toward him. My father made a record of every document in the original case file. Dates, descriptions, his own annotations. The court records match his descriptions exactly. She held Finch's gaze. He kept this journal for 3 years before the trial. Before he knew there would be a trial. He was documenting because he was a careful man, not because he was preparing a defense. Finch looked at the journal for a moment, then back at her. You should have been a lawyer, he said. Women cannot practice law, Mr. Finch, she said. No, he said. That is a significant loss to the profession. He picked up the folder. Now, Mr. Carter, what is the exact language of the warrant? She told him. He made notes. Obstruction and concealment, he said, both require proof of intent to deceive a lawful process. Mr. Carter's intent was to present evidence of fraud to a circuit court. That is not obstruction. That is the correct use of the judicial system. He looked up. We can have him released by morning. Tonight, Clara said. Finch looked at her. I want him out tonight, she said. Can it be done? If I can reach the right clerk before 5 o'clock, Finch said. The judge who signed William's warrant is Hastings. Hastings cannot rule on his own warrant. That is a clear conflict of interest. The interim duty judge this week is a man named Ashford. I know Ashford. He is careful, he is fair, and he despises procedural irregularities. Finch picked up his pen. Write me the direction to the county seat and have your fastest horse ready. Margaret appeared in the doorway. She had been listening from the hall, and she did not apologize for it. Thomas is already saddled, she said. Finch left within 10 minutes. The house settled into a waiting quiet. Margaret made tea. Clara could not drink it. She sat at the table with the documents and went through them again, not because there was anything new to find, but because moving through the evidence was the closest thing to action available to her, and she could not sit still. At 4 o'clock, Eleanor Hastings came to the door. Clara heard her voice in the front hall, heard the sharp, clear syllables of a woman who had not anticipated being kept waiting, who had knocked and found Margaret, instead of a servant, and was recalibrating. I want to speak to Miss Whitmore, Eleanor said. Margaret said pleasantly, She is busy. I did not ask if she was free, Eleanor said. I said I want to speak to her. Clara set down her pen. She walked to the front hall. Eleanor looked at her. Today there was no pleasantness in her face, none of the carefully arranged social surface she had worn every previous time Clara had seen her. What was underneath it was not ugly exactly. It was something more complicated than ugly. It was the face of a woman who had wanted something very specific and had watched it move out of her reach in real time, and was not yet sure how to feel about it. He is going to lose everything, Eleanor said, not threatening, almost quiet. Do you understand that his standing, his relationships, his... She stopped, looked at Clara with a directness that cut through all of it. Was it worth it? What you did, coming here hiding, using him. I did not use him, Clara said. He did not know what he was agreeing to, Eleanor said. He didn't know the cost. You let him. I told him, Clara said. Twice. I told him what he was risking. I told him to consider it carefully. I told him I did not need him to save me. She held Eleanor's gaze. He chose. That was his choice, not mine. I did not make it for him. Eleanor looked at her. You love him, Eleanor said. It came out flat, like something she had worked out logically and was now confirming. Clara said nothing. He loves you, Eleanor said. I have known William Carter for 9 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I watched him walk away this morning with 6 men behind him, and he looked... She stopped. Something moved across her face. He looked certain. He has never looked that certain about anything I have offered him. The silence between them was the most honest silence Clara had ever shared with Eleanor Hastings. I am sorry, Clara said finally, that this is what happened. I did not come here to— I know you didn't, Eleanor said. Her voice was tired now. The sharpness was still there, but it was tired. I know exactly why you came here, and it had nothing to do with William. I have been angry at the wrong person. She paused. It's easier. Clara looked at her. Your father, Clara said carefully. What he signed. I know what he signed, Eleanor said. I have known for longer than you think. Her jaw tightened. My father is not a cruel man. He is a man who made a choice and spent years justifying it. There is a difference, and it is smaller than I used to believe. She turned to go. Stopped. If your lawyer manages to get William out tonight, she said, her back still to Clara, tell him. She stopped again. Tell him I will not stand in the way. Whatever my father decides to do, I will not add to it. A pause. That is all I can offer, but it is something. She left. Clara stood in the hall for a moment. Then she went back to the dining room and sat down and pressed her hands to her face and let herself feel for 30 seconds the absolute strangeness of the day that was happening around her. Then she picked up her pen and kept working. At 7:15 in the evening, hooves on the road. She heard them, and her hands went still. She listened, counted, felt the specific rhythm of 2 horses, not 6, not the weight of a procession, but the easy speed of men coming home. She was at the door before they reached the yard. William dismounted in the falling light and looked across the yard at her in the doorway, and for a moment neither of them moved. He looked tired. He looked dusty from the road again, twice. In 2 days, she thought he had ridden in from somewhere looking like this, and both times he had come back. He crossed the yard. He stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her face, read it the way he had been learning to read it, which was better than she wanted him to be at it, and better than she could now object to, and he said, You built the whole case while I was gone. Finch built it, she said. I organized it. He told me, William said. He said— He stopped. Something in his face shifted. He said you should have been a lawyer. He told me the same thing, she said. He's right, William said. She looked at him. He was 3 feet away. He was tired and dusty, and he had spent a day in custody on her behalf, and his coat was wrong from riding, and his hair was still undone from the wind, and he was looking at her with that expression, the one she still did not have a word for. You came back, she said. It was all she had. Clara, he said. His voice was quiet. I told you. What happened today had nothing to do with you, and everything to do with what was right. He paused. But I will also tell you, and I want to be clear, that I know exactly what I am saying, that coming back to this house tonight had everything to do with you. Not with the case. Not with the right thing. He held her gaze. With you. She looked at him. She thought about the morning she had arrived at the servants' entrance of this house in her gray dress with her pig farmer's name and her father's journal at the bottom of her bag, and the version of herself that had walked through that door, who had promised she would never let anyone see her break. She thought about all the things she had held alone. William, she said. Yes, he said. I am not a pig farmer's daughter, she said. But I am also not the professor's daughter you would have met in a parlor if things had been different. I am what 3 years of hiding made me. I am— She stopped, steadied. I am not easy. I am not simple. I have a case to fight, and a name to restore, and a father to vindicate, and when all of that is done, I do not know what I am going to be. I know, he said. And you are not afraid of that, she said. No, he said. I find I am very much the opposite of afraid of that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward. She took his hand, not dramatically, not the way things happen in the stories she had read in her father's library. Quietly. Simply. The way you take hold of something real. His fingers closed around hers. They stood like that in the evening air, The summer heat still heavy around them, the house behind her, and the road behind him, and everything that was coming still ahead. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. Not a resolution, not yet. Not with the case still open, and the judge still powerful, and half of Virginia still arranged against them, but a beginning. The specific, irreversible kind. The kind that once begun cannot be undone. Inside the house, Margaret Carter watched from the window with her tea going cold in her hands, and something on her face that was the first genuinely uncomplicated thing she had felt in years. She did not say anything. Some things did not need to be said. The hearing was set for the 3rd of September. Robert Finch had moved faster than Clara had believed possible, faster than the judge had anticipated. The circuit court in Charlottesville had agreed to hear the motion for review. Judge Ashford, the interim duty judge, who had released William the previous evening, had signed the order himself and sent it before Hastings could file a counter-motion. It was, Finch explained with barely concealed satisfaction, the legal equivalent of pulling the floor out from under a man before he could plant his feet. They had 11 days. Clara used every one of them. She and Finch worked through the documents with the systematic precision of people who understood that the truth was only as powerful as the form it was delivered in. They organized the fabricated testimony. First, the dead man's signature, the burial record from Staunton, the dates laid side by side so clearly that even a hostile reader could not pretend the discrepancy did not exist. Then the journal. Finch read every entry twice, annotated it in the margins, cross-referenced the names her father had recorded against the public record of who had spoken at the trial. 3 of the 4 men her father had named were still alive. 1 had moved to Kentucky. 2 remained in the county. William went to see them. He went alone. Clara did not ask to come, and he did not offer. They both understood, without discussing it, that a man arriving at another man's door to ask difficult questions was a different thing than a man arriving with the woman whose father those questions concerned. The first was a conversation. The second was a confrontation, and confrontations made men defensive, and defensive men lied. He was gone 2 days. He came back with written statements from both men. He set them on the dining room table without ceremony and looked at Clara across the papers and said, "They were told your father would withdraw the examination failure if they testified. They were told it would cost them nothing." He paused. "One of them has regretted it for 3 years. He signed without me having to ask twice." Clara read the statements. Her hands were steady and her face was still, and she did not cry because she had promised herself she would not cry until this was over, and it was not over yet. "The second man," she said. "Took longer," William said. "He has a family. He has a position. He was afraid." He met her eyes. "I told him that what he was afraid of had already happened to someone else's family, that the position he was protecting had been purchased with another man's ruin." He stopped. He signed. Clara set the papers down. "How did you convince him?" she said. "I told him the truth." William said simply, "I told him what your father was like, what he taught, what kind of man he was." He looked at her. "I told him about you." She looked up. "I told him what you did," William said. 3 years, a pig farmer's name, a journal you carried the whole time. I told him what it looked like for a daughter to protect her father's truth when no one else would." He paused. "He has a daughter. She is 14. Clara pressed her lips together. "He signed," she said. "He signed," William said. She picked up the statements and added them to the file. The 11 days moved fast and brutal, and there was no moment in them that was easy, but there was also no moment in them that was wasted, and that was something. Judge Hastings filed 3 counter-motions in the first week. Finch answered all 3 within 24 hours. The third counter-motion attempted to challenge the authenticity of the journal itself, claimed it was a recent fabrication, that the dates were invented, that Thomas Whitmore had never kept such records. Finch demolished it in 4 pages. He cited the paper, the ink, the binding he had brought in a man from Richmond, who assessed documents, who confirmed the journal was consistent with materials available in the valley in 1811, who signed his own statement with the calm authority of a professional who had been asked the question he was most qualified to answer. Clara read Finch's response the morning he filed it, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. The specific, clean satisfaction of watching a lie come apart at its seams. "Your father would have appreciated this," Finch said, watching her read. "He would have been insufferable about it," she said. "In the best possible way." Finch laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. It suited him. The night before the hearing, William found her in the library. She was not reading. She was sitting in the chair nearest the window with the journal in her lap, not open, just held. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes when he came in, and she did not try to pretend she had been doing something more productive. He sat in the chair across from her. He did not speak immediately. "Are you afraid?" he asked finally. The same question he had asked her once before in a different context, in a different version of their relationship. She thought about it honestly. She owed him honesty. "No," she said. "I was afraid for 3 years. I think I used it all up." She looked at the journal in her hands. "What I feel right now is—" She stopped reaching for the word. "Quiet. Like the moment before a storm breaks. Not afraid of the storm, just aware that it is coming." "That is a good way to be," he said. "My father used to say that clarity before a difficult thing was its own kind of grace," she said. He said panic was just clarity that had lost its nerve. William smiled. It was the slow kind, the kind that started in his eyes. "I would have liked him," he said. "He would have liked you," she said. "Eventually." She looked at him. "He would have made you work for it. He did not give his regard easily." "Neither does his daughter," William said. She looked at him across the small distance between the chairs. "No," she said. "She doesn't." He leaned forward and picked up her free hand from her knee and held it, and they sat like that in the quiet library while the summer night pressed against the windows, and tomorrow waited on the other side of the dark. The courtroom in Charlottesville was full. Clara had not anticipated that. She had anticipated a legal proceeding formal spare attended by the necessary parties and no one else. She had not anticipated that the news of the hearing would travel the way it traveled in Virginia, through the specific social circulatory system of a place where everyone knew everyone and information moved faster than horses. The room was full of people who had known Thomas Whitmore. Former students, she realized, looking at faces. Men in their 30s who had sat in his lecture hall and learned about the law as a living thing. 3 of them had written letters to Finch unsolicited after they heard the hearing was scheduled. Their letters were in the file. Their names were on the record. She had not known about the letters until that morning. Finch had mentioned them almost in passing, and she had stood in the hallway of the courthouse and felt the full force of something she had not let herself feel. Her father had mattered. She had known it. She had always known it. But knowing it alone in the dark was different from standing in a hallway and understanding that 23 students had remembered him for 3 years, and some of them had driven days to be in this room. She pressed her hand flat against the wall for a moment. William was beside her. He did not speak. He simply moved close enough that their arms were touching, and that was enough. They walked into the courtroom together. Judge Hastings was present. She had known he would be. He sat at the side of the room with his lawyer and his face arranged in the careful blankness of a man who has decided that composure is his best remaining asset. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, or perhaps she was simply looking at him differently, seeing him not as the large, unmovable force she had been afraid of for 3 years, but as a man of 62, who had made a wrong choice and spent years building walls around it, and whose walls were coming down. Eleanor was not there. Clara had half expected her, but the seat beside the judge was empty, and its emptiness said something she filed away without comment. Judge Ashford was a tall man with a deliberate manner and the specific patience of someone who has learned that rushing legal proceedings produces worse results than taking them slowly. He called the court to order at 9 o'clock exactly. He did not look at Hastings as he did it, but Clara, watching his face, thought that the absence of that look was itself a look. Finch presented the case in 1 hour and 20 minutes. He was precise, sequential, unhurried. He laid the fabricated testimony, first walked the court, through the dates, the burial record, the signature, the impossibility of the thing. He laid it so clearly and so methodically that by the time he finished, the room had the particular quality of a space in which something has just become permanently obvious. Then he presented the witness statements. The two men who had testified against Thomas Whitmore, who had signed their own confessions of what they had been promised and what they had done. He read the key passages aloud in a voice that was entirely without drama because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. Then he presented the journal. He did not read all of it. He read 2 entries. The first was from 6 months before the trial, in which Thomas Whitmore recorded a conversation he had with a man who told him that the Hastings family was angry, and that he should consider whether his position at the college was worth protecting. The second was from the week before the judgment, in which he wrote, "I have done nothing wrong. I know I have done nothing wrong, but I begin to understand that in certain rooms, knowing the truth is not the same as being believed. I write this down for Clara. I write this down so that someday someone will read it and know." The room was completely silent when Finch finished reading. Clara sat with her hands folded and her face still and let herself hear her father's words, in another man's voice, in a room full of people who were listening. She let herself feel the full weight of it, the grief and the vindication, and the 3 years, and the journal she had carried, and the man sitting beside her who had ridden back in the dark. She did not cry, but it was close. Hastings' lawyer made his arguments. They were competent, and they were thorough, and they landed on the room with the specific quality of arguments that are technically sound and morally empty arguments that everyone in the space can hear the hollowness in, but cannot immediately counter on legal grounds. He challenged the chain of custody. He challenged the document assessment from Richmond. He challenged the standing of the witness statements on the grounds that the men who signed them had been subject to undue influence. Finch rose to rebut each point with the efficiency of a man who had anticipated all of them and prepared accordingly. When both sides finished, Judge Ashford sat for a long moment. He looked at the documents. He looked at the room. He looked once briefly at Clara, the kind of look a judge allows himself before he rules, the specific look of a man making sure the weight of what he is about to do is properly felt. Then he ruled. The conviction of Thomas Whitmore, he said, was hereby suspended, pending a full review by the Circuit Court. The original judgment was vacated on the grounds of procedural fraud. The fabricated testimony constituted a fundamental corruption of the judicial process and would be referred to the state attorney for further investigation. The estate of Thomas Whitmore, to the extent that assets remained identifiable, would be returned to his surviving heir. He looked at Clara when he said the last part. Surviving heir. She heard her father's name said aloud in a courtroom for the first time in 3 years, said correctly. Not as a convicted man, not as a disgraced professor, but as a man whose name was being restored. She pressed her hands flat on the table in front of her. William's hand found hers under the table. She held it. The room erupted. Not loudly. It was a courtroom, and the people in it had enough respect for the proceeding to contain themselves, but in the specific way of a space where something built wrong has just been corrected. The sound of release. Of people exhaling the breath they had been holding. Hastings rose without a word and left. Clara watched him go. She felt nothing toward him in that moment that was simple, not triumph, not relief, not anger. What she felt was the specific exhaustion of a long-held weight being set down, and the strange lightness that comes after, and the understanding that lightness is not the same as being unburdened, because some things leave marks regardless of how they end. She thought about Eleanor. She thought about the conversation in the hallway, "I will not stand in the way." She thought about what it must have cost Eleanor to say that, and what it had cost her to know. Outside the courthouse, the morning had moved on. The day had continued its work, without any awareness of what had just happened inside those walls, which was its job, and which felt as always slightly surreal. Finch gripped her hand with both of his, and said things she would remember as impressions rather than words, warmth and satisfaction, and something about her father that she would take out and examine later when she was alone. Former students came up to her. Men she did not know who knew her name, who said her father's name the way you say the name of someone you have thought about for a long time, with the specific warmth of a kept memory. One of them, a man of about 35, with a direct manner and a worn coat, held her hand for a moment and said, "He told us once that the law was only as just as the people willing to stand up in it. I thought about that every time I was afraid to stand up for something." He paused. "I'm glad someone stood up for him." She did not trust her voice. She pressed his hand and nodded. She found William at the edge of the crowd. He was watching her with that expression, still the same one, still without a name, but she was beginning to understand that perhaps it did not need one. Perhaps some things were most themselves when they remained unnamed. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it for the first time in 3 years without qualification. They rode home slowly. There was no urgency left in the day, and they let the horses choose their own pace, and the Virginia countryside moved around them in late summer heat, the tobacco cured and golden, the air full of the specific richness of a season ending well. They did not talk much. Some things did not need talking. Some things had been said in documents and journal entries, and hands held under courtroom tables, and riding back in the dark, and all of it together amounted to a language they were both already fluent in. At one point, Clara looked at the road ahead and said, "I do not know what happens now." William said, "No, neither do I." "That used to frighten me," she said. "And now," she thought about it. "Now it just seems like the next thing," she said. He looked at her. "That is the most hopeful sentence you have ever said," he said. She smiled. It was the real kind, the unguarded kind that she had not allowed herself in so long. It felt strange and right and necessary. "Don't tell anyone," she said. "I have a reputation to maintain." He laughed. The house came into view ahead of them, the long white front and the summer fields, and Margaret, who had somehow known when to appear on the porch, standing there with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who has been waiting for good news and has just received confirmation that it is coming. A year is a long time when you are rebuilding something from the ground up. Clara spent the first months working with Finch on the formal restoration of her father's estate. Most of it was gone. 3 years of seizure left little that could be reclaimed intact. But his name was restored fully and officially in every document that mattered. His position at the college was acknowledged posthumously. 3 of his former colleagues wrote public letters. A small notation was added to the institution's records. Professor Thomas Whitmore, educator of law, 1801 to 1813. Wrongfully convicted. Conviction vacated by circuit court order, September 1817. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was the truth, written down officially, and her father had believed in the power of that more than almost anything else. Clara moved out of the servants' quarters in October, when the question of what she was and what she was doing in the Carter household had become obvious enough to the county that continuing the pretense would have been a performance without an audience. She moved to the East Wing, into the rooms that had been empty since William's mother died. Margaret arranged it without being asked. She was not William's wife. Not yet. They had not rushed that, partly because there was still too much to do, and partly because they had both learned in their different ways the cost of moving faster than understanding. They moved carefully. They moved honestly. They said things directly, without the social grammar of performance, and sometimes they disagreed, and neither of them pretended otherwise, and the disagreements resolved into something stronger than they had been before, which was how she knew it was real. Eleanor Hastings left Virginia in November. She went to relatives in Philadelphia. Margaret heard through the channels that such news travels. Clara thought about her sometimes not with guilt exactly, but with the specific awareness of someone who understands that her happiness had required another person's loss, and that the knowledge of that was part of the honest accounting of things. Judge Hastings resigned his position in January of 1818. The state investigation into the fabricated testimony had made his continuation untenable, and he had enough judgment at the end to step aside before he was removed. Clara did not pursue him further. She had what she came for. She was her father's daughter. She wanted justice, not destruction. William's standing in the county did suffer. He had known it would. Several families withdrew from social connection with him in the months after the hearing, the specific quiet punishment of a society that does not like to be shown that it was wrong. 3 business relationships ended. 2 did not. He bore it with the steadiness of a man who has decided what he values and is at peace with paying the cost of it. He also changed things. The phrasing was always quiet. William Carter was not a man who announced his changes, but they were real and they were consistent. He opened a school on the estate grounds in the spring for the children of workers and tenants. He hired a teacher from Charlottesville, a young man fresh out of his studies who taught with the infectious enthusiasm of someone who has not yet learned to be cynical about the work. Clara went and talked to the students sometimes. She did not lecture. She sat with them and answered their questions, and showed them, when they asked, that a person could know Latin and law and still learn something new every day, which was her father's belief and was now hers. One morning, in late spring, William found her in the library. She was reading. Actually reading this time, not snatching a page between tasks, not hiding what she was doing, but sitting in the good chair by the window with a book open in her lap, and the morning coming in around her. She had been there an hour. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. He had that expression, the one she had finally over the months found a name for. It was not love, exactly, though it contained love. It was not admiration, though it contained that too. It was the specific look of a man seeing something exactly as it is, and being glad without reservation that it exists. "Do you remember," he said, "the night of the dinner party, the night you answered me in Latin?" "Yes," she said. "Do you remember what I called you?" he said. "Before you answered." She held his gaze. "A pig farmer's daughter." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I have thought about that sentence every day since. What I meant by it. What I thought it proved. What I thought it said about the person I was." He paused. "I think I believed that where a person came from told you everything that mattered about them. That I had earned my position and my library and my name through something inherent, not through luck, not through circumstance, but through something true about me." He stopped. "You proved I was wrong, not by arguing, not by performing, just by being exactly what you were." She looked at him across the room. "You changed," she said. "Most people don't." "You made it impossible not to," he said. She stood up. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. "My father used to say," she said quietly, "that the truest sign of a noble person was not where they stood when things were easy. It was where they stood when it cost them something." "Wise man," William said. "Yes," she said. He was. They stood in the doorway of the library with the morning around them and the school on the grounds behind them, and the whole long year between that night in the parlor and this morning. And Clara Whitmore looked at the man in front of her, the man who had called her a pig farmer's daughter in Latin, and been wrong about what that meant, and had known he was wrong, and had paid the cost of correcting it, and felt the full, uncomplicated, irrevocable weight of what they had built. Not a story of a poor girl raised to high station. Not a story of rescue. A story of two people, each of them wrong about something fundamental, each of them stubborn enough to find their way to something true. Her father had written it down. The truth, if you write it carefully enough, cannot be taken. He had been right, and in the end, in this library, in this morning, in this life that was nothing like what either of them had planned, and was exactly what they had earned, the truth was not just written down. It was lived.